For the most part, the technical bar is very similar, but you still need to know how to design system architecture. Both of those company part of the interview process, at least at the time, was you need to be able to construct or reconstruct the entire system. And when I say system, I meant, is it like Gmail or is it the AWS system or the server? So has any of the tech stuff changes between the two hiring bar?
You really needed to have basically a basic level software engineer, entry level, pretty much all of the levels of TPM. When I was at Google, the questions were a little bit more, at least for my group, it was more like, can you do some SQL queries? Do you understand what this would mean if I was to ask you about this? Can you explain this further? But it was certainly not as in-depth as the group I was in when I was at Amazon. So that was, if you were going to be, a 4, 5, 6, 7, you still probably needed to have the software engineering skills of like a 3 or 4. So you can't just go in there thinking like, oh, I don't have to know any of this stuff, because that's not going to be a TPM, at least not at Amazon. You're going to be a PM. You're going to be something else, or a PMT.
That's exactly
maybe
what
even.
I tell them. Yep.
Yeah, you're going to have to know this stuff. And so I think it was so integral into my software engineer training to know some of that stuff, because I did, like I said, 2 loops, and there were, let's say, 4 software engineering questions, as there are when it came to that loop. But when I did the TPM, there were 75% behavioral leadership principle questions, and then there was 25% design me some sort of technical thing. So it was still part of the process.
Google doesn't really dive as deep technically as Amazon as far as the role and responsibility. Can we talk a little bit more on what is the role different?
It's weird because I think each company can kind of define it the way that they want to. So I'm speaking more in generalities from what I've seen and what I've heard from, I have several friends still in the industry, is that a lot of the time what a TPM might have done at Amazon is sometimes what the PM is doing over at Google, and it was like switched. So he was just really surprised sometimes how technical I had to get as a TPM at Amazon versus when I did end up switching, I maybe was like a little bit of SQL to make some of my reporting and structure type stuff to be a little bit more elegant. But other than that, I didn't have to do really any coding stuff. It was timelines, efficiency management, project management. It was just different. It was different.
Yeah,
for me personally.
I try to explain that. It's hard for someone to listen to someone like me from a complete recruiting background, because right now, for those of you who's interested in Google as a program manager for most team, the bar is the same thing as a TPM now at an Amazon. I don't know if you heard that, Shelly, because
I wouldn't be surprised, because the PMs, they were writing technical documents.
Yeah.
They were writing they were kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the TPMs in my org were doing a lot of management of releases going out and executable types of weekly.
Sounds like a PMO.
It was interesting. It was just
PMO,
unlike
not a
anything
TPM
I've
role.
ever seen before. And so that's why I was like, I hesitate to speak in all of the, and like I said, only my experience, only the groups I was in.
Yes.
And I think it's also strange because maybe the TPM group that I was in at Amazon was more highly technical than I've seen a lot of other TPM roles have to be, even at Amazon as well. So it's maybe atypical.
Google is a much more cautious decision making when it comes to business or business functionality than Amazon. Then again, we're comparing apples and oranges, right?
Yeah.
It's not even the same. Amazon looked for a very specific type of doer. Think about doer, right? So that's a type of talent Amazon looks for versus Google. Google is a very process driven, at least during my time, and I know that it hasn't changed. Google doesn't do very well with changes. Yes, I'm saying this very authentically, because what has worked really well with Google, why change it, versus Amazon? What has worked really well at Amazon? Let's break it and try to make it faster and better, right?
They're not afraid at all to just try stuff. It's very much like, you guys are your own startup. Let's go until you take down the entire server. We don't really care. Like, let's just see what we can do. So in the end, if it's not something that actually makes someone's life better or the experience better, they may not want to really look at it. But
Shelly,
also keep in mind, sometimes the customer is not the actual end user Amazon customer, could be other teams at. So if you are an internal team whose customer is other internal teams, if you can then articulate that as the customer experience, that is still technically a customer experience.
Yep. How would you advise someone to prep for a system design interview, Shelly?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm sure you probably have some videos on that. I think
Yep.
it's just one of those like once you really start to understand some of the principles and you break down some of the pieces and the things that you know. There's always a lot of things you don't know. Start with the things that you do know, and then weave in what you do know about system design with those things. Does that make sense? So start with what you do know and reduce that ambiguity, and then really start to fit in the pieces of like, okay, these things in mind, this is what I would do.
The one thing that I will not advise for anyone to do is to just pay for a tech coach or anything like that, because I believe that if you don't have the foundation for design, taking a course to learn design, it's not going to get you the job. So you would already come from some level of experiences. However, there are a low ton of free stuff on YouTube. If you just Google system design interviewed on Glassdoor, I talk a lot about Glassdoor, by the way. They're not sponsoring me. I just love Glassdoor because people like you who end up working for companies like an Amazon actually give you the type of questions. And some of them actually tell you where to go to prep. There's actually Amazonian, by the way, that's giving you tutorial how to do system design on this wonderful place called YouTube. Okay?
And I have to say, sometimes it's not about the actual solution. It's about your explanation of solution. So don't just go and find like what is the finished answer. If they have a video explaining how they got to it, that's the most important part, or why one was better than the other as like a trade-off. That's the important thing to glean into.